pleasure. What you didn't hear in the introduction was that I started my professional life as an entrepreneur. I was very young. They were great little businesses. I started 2 of them. And I made the kind of mistakes that you can only make when you're very young. And we like to say now they were fabulous learning experiences. I then went on to take an extremely glamorous and exciting job. I ran purchasing systems for government agencies. I know, brace yourselves, for about 8 years. And then I'd had about enough of that, and I decided to go back to school. Went to the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School, where I did my PhD, and joined Columbia Business School, which is in New York City, right after that, and have been there ever since. So that's just sort of what you got in front of you. And what I was asked to speak about was essentially 3 things. The first thing that we're going to cover is how can you plan intelligently for new things when you don't have the data you would like to make a plan. And that kind of goes together with a mindset that I think is very consistent with the speakers you've been hearing today around experimentation, around trying new things, around learning what you need to learn when it's not completely clear what it is at the outset. So that's sort of part 1. Part 2 is a little more tactical, and it has to do with, okay, you've got this great idea, you've thought through this plan, you know what you want to do, and now you have a bunch of folks that you're speaking to that have the attitude we heard this morning. They all think they're Robert Parker. So how can you begin to anticipate and perhaps get ahead of some of those forces of delay or resistance that might get in the way of something that you think is a great idea that you really want to implement? And then we'll finish up with some very personal reflections on how do you make sure your organization is designed, is built to deliver on executing those great ideas that you've got. So it's sort of coming from how do I think about the idea to how do I think about what's going to get in the way of making the idea happen to what do I need to do as a leader in my organization to really build something that's going to be successful. So that's sort of the broad rubric. And I'd like to start with an observation, which is that growth, and many of you are thinking about how do I grow my membership, how do I get my organization into new spaces, it's hard. And when you look at the big new things that have really driven economic growth across all kinds of sectors, a pattern that repeats itself over and over is that the companies that succeeded are typically not the companies who were in play before this new technology or new way of doing business occurred. So just take the top of that chart there. Who knows more about advertising than Time Warner? And yet when you look at who's making a lot of money in advertising, it's Google, and Time Warner is desperately trying to catch up. And I could have used 400 other companies as examples on this slide. And what's interesting, and I do this a lot, I go to companies and I say to them, what gets in the way of your being able to do these things, to get into new technologies, to get into new geographies, to get into new areas? And what do I get back? This list. Lack of incentives, the existing business doesn't want to change, the boss doesn't get it, my board won't let me, and on and on and on. It's nobody's job, I'm afraid to fail, failure's not rewarded, nobody's gonna... Does any of this sound familiar to you? I'm seeing a lot of people going, uh-huh, uh-huh. Now here's what's fascinating. 90% of those things, self-inflicted. They are internal to your organization. And here's what I think is a fantastically hopeful thing. If they are self-inflicted, they can be self-removed. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's the natural course of organizations. But given a few appropriate tools and approaches, you can do it. You can make changes. And we've seen plenty of cases where big established companies have learned, or big established organizations have learned to do creative new things. And you're here with a bunch of people who have figured it out. So I think the plus of it is you don't have to be perfect. You just need to be able to get rid of a few of these obstacles to really get your organization poised for change, poised for growth. And it's as much a mindset as anything else. So as I promised, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is what's the mindset, and more specifically, what's a very concrete approach that you might take in your organization to plan for something when you yourself don't yet know what the data are that would tell you you're right or wrong. So, because a lot of this stuff, unfortunately, falls into the space that Ayers alluded to this morning. You don't have the data, and you have small numbers. You don't have thousands of observations to be able to run a regression off of. What do you do in that case? So I'm hoping to fill in a few of the gaps in that. And it starts off with some research that I do. This is one of the things academics get up to all the time. I have research I've been doing on corporate flops. These are the big ones. These are the ones that make the headlines. I have this file at home I call the flops file. You have to lose your parent organization at least $50 million to get into my flops file. That's the bar. And I used to think that was an awful lot of money. And then I pick up the paper yesterday, and what's Amazon, AOL is announcing that after spending $850 million 2 years ago to buy Bebo, the social networking site, they're either going to sell it or shut it down because they haven't figured out what to do with it. And I'm thinking, I'm going to have to completely raise the threshold for my flops file. And here are a few of them. You can see them on the graph. You know, Revlon's Vital Radiance, cosmetics for women of a certain age, whom it turns out do not like to be reminded of this when they are buying cosmetics. Michelin's Run Flat Packs tire, which is a terrific innovation, but in order to use it, you have to redesign your car, redesign your service station, and redesign your complete tire changing infrastructure, kind of a large order. Now, I could make fun of these things, and that's not really my purpose. My purpose is to say these were all smart organizations. These are all intelligent companies that went after these opportunities with the best possible planning techniques that they could find, and yet they went totally wrong. And you ask yourself why? And these went wrong in a big way, a big expensive way. And you say to yourself, why? And I would propose the following, that they went wrong because they were trying to plan as though they had a lot more data than they actually did. They were trying to plan in order to prove that they were right. And they were trying to plan around artificially created benchmarks or milestones rather than planning around a business as it kind of evolved. And that got my co-authors and I thinking about, could there be a better way to do this? And by the way, we've seen this in companies, for-profit companies. I've seen plenty of examples in the not-for-profit or more like yourselves, the association sector. So, you know, there's no one group